All right, let's move to this story. Some arrests, plenty of questions about how the security cluster ministers handled the unrest, lots of cleaning up and billions of rands in damage to malls and public infrastructure. As we continue to pick up the pieces after last month's attempted insurrection in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, police are warning they have received intelligence in the last 2 weeks that those behind the unrest will target police stations to obtain firearms. So how real are these threats at this point? I'm joined now by Dr. Guy Lamb, a criminologist at the Department of Political Science at Stellenbosch University. Dr. Lamb, thank you so much for your time. So this is a communique. It's an intelligence briefing, I understand. It came out about 2 weeks ago. What can you tell us about it, and how are these things assessed for credibility?
Well, in terms of this particular intelligence brief, we know it came out around the time just as the riots were starting to settle down. We've sort of seen the most of it, and there were sort of rumours that there would be a second phase to this form of violence. We haven't seen that second phase yet. But I mean, the point that's raised in an intelligence brief is quite a concern, because police stations in certain areas, particularly in rural areas, particularly where there's understaffed police stations that are quite vulnerable at night, they have been targeted. Certainly we know of at least 10 over the past 3 or 4 years that have been targeted in sort of many deep rural areas where organised criminal groups have attacked police stations, robbed them at night when they've only got 1 or 2 staff members there. We've recently seen this in the Northern Cape, but a few months ago we've seen it in the Eastern Cape, and we've seen it on a few other occasions. And those sort of police stations are quite vulnerable for robberies, because they would sit with certain weapon stores, with armories that would have at least service pistols, maybe shotguns. In many cases they would have automatic weapons as well. So if you're an organised criminal group or a group of individuals who want high-powered weapons, one place to go would be those kind of police stations. So I think the intelligence brief had some value to it, and I think it's something that we do need to be concerned about, and it has those sort of police stations have been targeted in the past.
Does this mean that the attempted insurrection isn't actually over, or do we not know?
I think we don't know at the moment. It seems as though things have quietened down, but we haven't seen any major arrests happening yet. We still don't have the full picture of how it was organised. We get bits and pieces of the puzzle. We don't actually know if there were plans beyond the sort of instability that was sought. The kind of focus on parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, we don't know if the plans go beyond that. But certainly it does, as if you're wanting to certainly up the ante in terms of violence and looking to acquire firearms, focusing on certain police stations might get you those firearms.
There's also quite a disturbing report, and it came through the Ministry of Justice. They sent out a message that a voice note being circulated, purportedly, of the Chief Justice Mogoeng was not at all him, but it was pretending to be him, and it was apparently talking about future acts of civil unrest. They say it's absolutely fake news. The fact that things like this are still circulating, could that mean the disinformation campaign is ongoing? Or could this just be copycat action?
Well, at the moment we don't know, but I mean certainly around part and parcel of the insurrection and the rioting and the looting that we saw of a few weeks ago, that had this kind of a prominent role of sort of social media and promoting fake news. We saw kind of a number of news stories that were driving some of the looting and some of the rioting. So this may be from the same sources, or it could be from individuals who just derive some sort of pleasure and satisfaction about, kind of sowing disinformation and creating uncertainty and fear. But there were certainly behind the most recent violence, there were people who were quite skilled in putting out this sort of information. So there's definitely a possibility that they may be behind this one.
And of course we're seeing as well that opposition parties in particular are gearing up because they want a very real probe of how the security cluster handled this unrest. There are some very serious questions that they need to answer. Do you think it's important that Parliament deal with this specifically rather than just law enforcement agencies? And if so, what are the pertinent questions that you think need answering?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think we saw different arms of government not performing particularly well. We saw, sort of absence of forewarning on this and absence of adequate intelligence sharing and discussion. I mean, if we use the example of what happened in the US around the 9/11 attacks, which, they saw the aircraft, smashing into the Twin Towers and hitting the Pentagon, and that led to a massive commission of inquiry into the state of intelligence services and intelligence gathering and institutional rivalries. I think that's a similar moment for South Africa. We've never seen something like this before, and certainly in democratic South Africa. And I think that there's a requirement for some sunlight to be shone on certainly on the intelligence services, on how the security cluster of ministers and agencies and departments work together so that we can prevent these sort of things from happening. And what often happens, unfortunately, with intelligence services and security services is that they will tend to, we won't see much reform unless there is considerable oversight and there actually is a commission of inquiry that gets to the bottom of this. But obviously we don't want it to become overly politicized, which is at risk of doing, and the ruling party might not actually move forward with this. But I think there really is a number of crises that we need to address, and I think a full investigation that's public needs to take place.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Dr. Guy Lamb, a criminologist at the Department of Political Science at Stellenbosch University, commenting there on the intelligence reports that police stations could be targeted for firearms. And of course, he makes the point that police stations tend to be vulnerable anyway. And this report came out a few weeks ago. And while things have quietened down, we can't be completely sure that it is over the attempted insurrection.